wide open!
Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance has been a long time coming. After a brief tease and a long period of silence, Kojima Productions' Metal Gear Solid Rising was dead in the water without any convenient nanomachines to resurrect it. Platinum Games, the collective oddballs behind the sexy and stripperific Bayonetta, received a lofty proposition from Kojima to bring this title back from the digital graveyard. And they did. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance may add a stupid hybrid word to the title, but does it add to the franchise in any meaningful way? Let's find out here in this review of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
I think it's time for Jack to let her rip.
In a post-Metal Gear Solid 4 world, the war economy doesn't have the enslaving sway it once possessed. Raiden, part of a new PMC, doesn't get to enjoy this peace long enough since a terrorist group swiftly launches an attack on an African Prime Minister Raiden just so happens to be assisting. Severely injured and grasping for another chance at life, Raiden is rescued and rebuilt as a cyborg bent on vengeance along with discovering the motives behind the attacks that crippled him. Revengeance takes more of an action initiative when compared to other Metal Gear games, which mostly works out in its favor. It may feel rushed at times, but the white-knuckle, physics-defying action scenes are visually impressive and spice up the story. These scenes are shorter and give you what you want in a way that is brief but just as entertaining. The whole story is pretty solid, but the last hour is some of the weirdest in the series' history. It's dumb, amazing, and then dumb again, making it almost impossible to hate. Raiden's arc is also noteworthy since it swerves into unexpected territory and transforms him into a more interesting person. It takes a cliche of the genre and flips it on its head. While it may not be Kojima Productions' best story, it is easily the best narrative seen in one of Platinum's games. Like classic Metal Gear, the evildoers form a nefarious group, clearly laying out who has to be chopped up in order to achieve peace. Each cyborg antagonist gracefully fits the traditional mold established by the franchise, but each individual has their own characteristics to set them apart from one another. Although their methods are questionable, their determination to achieve their goal through their twisted sense of justification is a trait that most memorable villains possess. They bring up points that, while evil, make you think a little more philosophically about some very real-world problems. Fighting these villains is part of what makes each so compelling. By the time you actually clash swords with these baddies, the game has appropriately built up enough hype for some time and allows for these duels to become climactic fights to the death. The thumping, oddly amazing rock riffs perfectly punctuate each battle, accordingly amping you up for an already bombastic fight. Actual execution far outshines the build-up, since these multi-stage, larger-than-life fights throw multiple different forms of attacks at you. These battles exercise the game's mechanics well, and yield a healthy dose of satisfaction once you cut them to pieces. Boss fights are the highlight of the combat, but the regular swordplay can still hold its own in most circumstances. Like Ninja Gaiden, fighting is less about chaining together endless, stringy combos, and more about just surviving and looking like a complete badass. Zandatsu, the slicing mechanic, is a key way of obtaining that status. Once you've hacked away on an enemy enough or executed a perfectly timed counter, Raiden does a few graceful flips, allowing you to slow down time and chop the enemy into as many bits as your sick mind allows. Dicing the target in just the right spot lets Raiden grab the spine, crushing it into his palms and refilling his fuel and health supply along the way. Somehow a simple routine act like this fails to become old despite the hundreds of times you'll do it during the campaign. It's always awesome. Parrying and dodging, which are key moves in Raiden's arsenal, are a little unorthodox. Instead of holding a button to actively block, parrying is achieved by pressing the stick in the direction of the attack and hitting the light attack button, which is poorly tutorialized. Parrying works most times and can fall into a hypnotic rhythm, but the left field approach to the system causes problems. The biggest issue with this system is the camera. Off-screen attacks and the sudden jerky camera movements can make some battles feel a little unfair since it can be impossible to react accordingly. The point of view also rarely goes right behind Raiden, requiring most counters to be pushed in weird angular directions. Swordplay puts its best foot forward when it consists solely of sword-wielding cyborgs, hence why the boss fights work so excellently. Revengeance sadly extracts a few of the worst parts from Ninja Gaiden, getting dazed or grabbed and getting shot. Getting peppered with off-screen rockets is never fun, and constantly getting stunned halts the swordplay more than this kind of game should allow. The game even tries to make you use rocket launchers, but they are never the ideal solution since aiming and firing takes nearly an ice age. In a game all about fast-paced sword fights, ranged weapons are incredibly out of place. The secondary weapons also seem out of place. While the gesture is a solid idea, each of them are so limited in their moveset that they hamstring what the sword can do rather than augment the standard combos. The secondary weapons take up a button normally used by the sword, so equipping a second blade chops about half of the moveset in favor of a slower, less useful weapon. Switching is also a total pain too, since you have to stand completely still in order to alternate between weapons. Ideally, swapping would work like Bayonetta, where a single button press instantly gives you a different loadout. It would be seamless and allow for greater combos, whereas the system in Revengeance is the complete opposite of that. Replay value has been steadily harder to accomplish within the genre, and Revengeance does a so-so job in this respect. New Game Plus is a readily available option upon completing the 6 or 7 hour campaign, but all other aspects aren't as beefy. The challenge room like VR missions strip out your upgrades and force Raiden into clunky stealth and shooting missions that frustratingly emphasize completion time over the final point total. Swordplay this strong should be the focus of these VR missions, not crappy shooting and bland stealth. The 2 free DLC chapters starring Jetstream Sam and the Wolf are neat to mess around with, but they recycle too much content and don't distinguish themselves enough from Raiden. They're fun distractions and give tiny interesting insights into each character, but let's just say that free is the best price for these pieces of content. The term Revengeance is actually an apt metaphor for Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Both are cheesy and stupid in the best of ways, but admittedly stylish enough to carry itself along. Revengeance displays its brass through its boss fights, sword combat, and Zendatsu, all of which are refreshing additions to the genre. Strangely, its accomplishments make its shortcomings that much more disappointing since it was this close to cleanly cutting all of its Zendatsu targets in half. Snake is still the shining pupil of the Metal Gear franchise, but Raiden's rising success in the slice and dice action game finally forces the stealth hero to share the spotlight. That didn't work out too well last time they were forced into that situation, but this makes up for it. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance gets an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Adios, amigos.